Jai Jinendra. Today we are going to talk about an important discovery of science, biophotons. And we'll see how this theory or discovery has implications with Jain philosophy. There are examples of biologists finding physical forces inadequate to explain physiological processes, leading them to speculate about presence of some hidden intelligent force that produces biological structures. This is an important speculation that only the material forces are not enough to explain the biological processes, but there is some intelligent force. Molecules have no intelligence, despite the manifold impressive functions that have been assigned to them. Even the enzymes or messenger molecules have to be triggered by external energy, that is photons, which activate the diversion transition state complexes. That means, all the processes taking place in the body biologically had to be triggered by some external energy, such as photons. There is an important discovery of biophotons. It is now well established that all living systems emit a weak light current of some photons. Scientists found that the nature of this weak light emitted by living cells is different from the sunlight and called these light photons as biophotons. So, every living being is emitting some kind of weak light. And how weak is this light? This is almost equal to the light coming from a candle placed at a 10-kilometer distance. So how feeble is this light, you can imagine. But scientists have measured this light in the body, in the biological systems. And they found that all living cells emit this light, and this light is different from sunlight. Sunlight also consists of photons, but these photons which are emitted inside the body are different from the light photons, and therefore they call them as biophotons. Biophotons covers the whole spectrum of range from UV to infrared. In the entire spectrum, these photons are emitted. Almost equal number of photons is distributed throughout the spectrum range, and mathematically they have called it F lambda is constant. What does it mean? It means that these biophotons which are being emitted in the body, they are at all frequencies of the light spectrum, and at each frequency the same amount of biophotons are being emitted, which means that F lambda is constant. So this is a little deviation from the normal sunlight, where in the spectrum range the number of photons is dependent on the frequency. Here they are independent of frequency. Biophoton emission is a few up to some 100 photons per second per centimeter square. Normally we talk about the human body. In the human body, per centimeter square surface or the area of the body, few photons or few hundred photons can be emitted. All organisms emit biophotons at a steady rate. This is an important part. It's not only the human being, all animals, all insects, even plants, bacteria, every living organism is emitting biophoton. So it is a characteristics of a living being. Organisms are emitters as well as receivers of coherent electromagnetic signals. This is another part. We continuously emit electromagnetic signals. Our body is doing it, as well as our body is constantly receiving such coherent electromagnetic signals from other objects or other bodies. The non-thermal photons provide the right quantum of energy at the right place and right time for the millions of reactions taking place per second per cell. Let us understand this statement. The first thing is, this is a non-thermal photon. So it means that there are also thermal photons. The thermal photons are being emitted because of heat, thermal. So all objects that way are emitting photons. Even inanimate objects, they are emitting photons, but they are thermal photons. Because of the heat or temperature, such photons are being emitted. These photons, which biophotons, which we are talking of, are not thermal. They are not emitted because of heat in the body. This is some other process by which these biophotons are being emitted. And what these biophotons are doing. So scientists have discovered that these biophotons in fact control reactions in a cell. And there are millions and millions of reactions going on in a cell per second. See the amount of activity which is taking place in a cell. Millions of reactions going on per second. Now, if these reactions had to take place in a proper way, then they had to be supplied energy, because no reactions take place without energy, without triggering that. A reaction has to be triggered. So the scientists now find that these are the biophotons. The biophotons which are really responsible for this kind of activity in a cell. And what the biophotons are doing, they are supplying right quantum of energy at right place and at right time. Okay, for every reaction. There are millions of reactions. For each one of them, the energy is being supplied by the biophotons at the right place so that the reaction is triggered and at the right time. Okay, this is a big discovery, in fact. Different parts of body emit biophotons with intensities ranging from 10 to 100 counts per second. So every part of the body is emitting biophotons. The count could be different, and range from 10 to 100 counts per second. A rough estimate shows that even a few photons can provide the activation energy to all the biochemical reactions which take place in a cell. So you don't require very many biophotons. Even a few photons can do this purpose, can serve this purpose, that can trigger all the chemical reactions, millions of them taking place in a cell per second. So you don't require a very large number of biophotons for this kind of activity. Thus, one has to stress that, number one, it is impossible that thermal photons may trigger the biochemical reactions in a living system. That's number one. So scientists are pretty sure about it, that the thermal photons cannot trigger chemical reactions. So it has to be biophoton, which is produced only in the body, can trigger the chemical reactions. And number 2, theoretically only 1 photon per cell could be sufficient for activating 10 raised to power 9 reactions per second, provided that it originates from a coherent photon field. This is another point, important point, that even 1 photon can activate as many as 10 raised to power 9 reactions per second, a billion reactions per second, So how powerful is biophoton? Look here. And provided there is a condition attached to this, that it originates from a coherent photon field. So if the photon is produced by a coherent field, then it has that capability of activating so many reactions per second in a cell. An increasing number of observations from different laboratories all over the world suggest that biophotons are emitted from a coherent photon field within the living system. So there is very extensive research being carried out on biophoton all over the world. There are very many laboratories doing it, and all of them are of the view that the biophotons are emitted from some coherent field within the living system. So within our body we have a coherent field from which the biophotons are being produced. What are the consequences of coherence? If this field is coherent, what does it mean? Number 1, it results in properties that are characteristics of biological systems. And what are the properties of biological systems? Number 1, high efficiency of energy transfer and transformation, which often approaches 100%. It's a very big thing, That is, all the processes which are taking place in our body, they have a very, very high efficiency. That is, no energy being wasted, Almost the entire amount of energy is being utilized in these processes. 100%, efficiency reaches 100%, And in natural processes, never so. Efficiency does not normally go beyond 60% or so. Whereas in the biological processes taking place in our body, the efficiency is almost 100%. And number 2, the ability of communication at all levels within cells, between cells. Okay, so the communication is very important part of our existence. All cells are communicating with each other every time, all the time, and that is how they coordinate the activities and they maintain the body system. So the communication is a very important part, and the scientists think that these biophotons provide this communication at all levels within the cell. Even in a cell, the different parts of the cell had to coordinate, and therefore they had to communicate information among them. And between cells, we have trillions of cells in our body. All cells are communicating with all other cells. Look here, the network of communication we have, And the scientists think that this is possible because of biophotons. And number 3, between organisms capable of resonating at the same frequency. This kind of a communication is also possible between animals, but provided they resonate at the same frequency, they communicate at the same frequency. For example, human beings, one human being can communicate with another human being and so on. We communicate at the same frequency. A human being will not be able to communicate with an animal or an insect, because they communicate at the different frequencies. The biophoton emission is indicative of an endogenous innate electromagnetic field pervading the entire organism. So, there is an electric field, which extends the entire body, which may act as both sender and receiver of biophotons. So, this field, is a sender of biophotons, that is, it produces biophotons, and it also receives biophotons. And these biophotons are electromagnetic bioinformation. Okay, so when the biophotons are going from one cell to another cell, say for example, they carry information with them, the electromagnetic bioinformation. So this is bioinformation carried in an electromagnetic form, and this regulates the life process. According to modern biophoton theory, DNA is the source, and the biophoton emission originates from the coherent field within this source. So there are large number of indications in different laboratories of the world that these biophotons are being generated from a source in the DNA. That is very important, and this source is a coherent field within this source. So in the DNA there is a coherent field, that is producing biophotons. This is the indication, although the scientists are not able to confirm this because this is taking place at such a subtle level that it's very difficult to measure in the laboratory this kind of phenomena. So this is the scientific discovery. Now our point is, how does it correlate with Jain philosophy? What this has to do with the Jain philosophy? One may think about it. So I ask a question: is the carbon body coherent electromagnetic field? Then it makes sense. We already know that the carbon body can exist as an electric body or an electromagnetic body. I told you about it in one of the earlier lectures. So the point is the carbon body coherent electromagnetic field? It is an electromagnetic field, all right, but is it coherent? What is coherent? When the waves are in the same phase, the field is called coherent. Before we accept this, it has to be explained how biophotons can be produced from the carbon body field. That is the first step, of our approach. So, is it possible that the carbon body can produce biophotons? The soul, and hence the carbon body, has innumerable pradeshas, countless pradeshas that we know. The gross body has trillions of cells. So there are multiple space points of carbon body for every cell. The quantity innumerable or countless is much greater than the quantity of trillions. So for each cell there are large number of space points of the soul and the carbon body. Infinite number of carbon organelles bind with the soul at a time, and this we learnt when we discussed the doctrine of karma. Very large number, or even up to infinite number of karmanas bond with the soul pradesha at any time. When you bond karma, such a large number of carbon organelles are bond with the existing carbon body. So infinite number of karma varganas bind with the soul at a time, that is at a particular unit of karma contains very large number of karma varganas, So any small karma which is binding with a karma body, it contains very large number of karma varganas, maybe countless or maybe infinite. So on the rise of karma, an equal large number of karma varganas are released, So you consider the other process, not the bonding but the rise of karma. So when the karma rises, that particular karma unit or karma dalik as is called in scriptures, that karma unit will also contain very large number of karma varganas, because when you bond with a very large number of karma vargana, and when the karma is released, the same thing happens, that very large number of karma varganas are being released. The released varganas, and this karma varganas is 40 meter, would aggregate to form a bigger vargana which is 80 meter locally. So it is possible that these varganas which are being released and which are 40 in nature, they aggregate, they combine together and form a bigger unit which is 80 in nature. This is possible, and this happens locally, because every pradesha would release a karma vargana. Same thing, very similar process, as because every pradesha binds karma, every pradesha also releases karma. In the system of 23 varganas, the karma vargana is 13th in order, and the pratyakshari vargana is 17th in order of increasing size. That I told you earlier, that if you have the entire spectrum of vargana, then in the Gomatsar system of classification of 23 varganas, the karma vargana is 13th in order and the pratyakshari vargana is 17th in order. And I also compared, if you remember, that this pratyakshari vargana compares with light photon. That also I told you in one of the lectures. So that means the karma varganas which are released and which are of 13th order have to combine in order to produce a photon which is 17th in an order, So there is a difference in size. The karma vargana is 40, but the pratyakshari vargana or the light photon is 80, So if this happens, then a 40 meter is converted into 80 meter on aggregation. So it is expected that biophoton is produced by aggregation of released varganas of nam karma, because the nam karma is the one which is doing all these physical activities in our body. So the varganas which are released from nam karma, they aggregate and perhaps produce the biophoton. Photon so produced has the characteristics of the rising karma. Okay, whatever karma, nam karma is rising, that has a certain characteristics, what purpose or what function this is going to perform in the body, according to the theory of nam karma. So this photon which is produced by nam karma then has that property of nam karma, it has that characteristic, that is what kind of function it is to perform in the body. So it has the particular information contained. As rising of nam karma is a continuous process, photons are continuously produced in a cell. Okay, because karma is rising all the time, nam karma is rising all the time, means the biophotons are also being produced all the time in a cell. We therefore postulate that biophotons are produced by coherent field of nam karma. So this is our postulation assumption. We assume and we speculate that the Nam karma is a field, electromagnetic field, I told you earlier. It is coherent, because the bonding of karma takes place simultaneously on all cells. The release of karma from all cells take place simultaneously. So this process is coherent, and we can now think of biophotons being produced by a coherent electromagnetic field which is due to Nam karma. The above inference is also supported by clairvoyant observations made by Pandit Sri Ram Sharma Acharya. We now have postulated, that the biophotons are being emitted by a coherent electromagnetic field because of karma, Nam karma. Now, I am quoting here some observations made by a yogi, Pandit Sri Ram Sharma Acharya. He was a great yogi and he could see the inside of his body and observe many things, inside the body. He was a great yogi and had the power to see the inside of the body minutely, very minutely. He could see the cell structure and observed that the nucleus of a cell is a star-like bright light spot. So what he observed, that the DNA, which the scientists say is a materialistic unit, he said that what I observe is that it's a bright star-like light, it's a light spot like a star. This is what he saw. And he said that still finer and subtle form of light pervades the entire cell. So in the DNA it is a star, bright spot like star, but otherwise in the entire cell also is pervaded by a light which is of little lesser intensity. So the all cells then are in the form of a light and a DNA as a bright light star. He also observed that the nucleus is an independent entity resting in space and is not a part of body structure. This is an important observation again. He saw that this light structure is different from the body structure, and the two are different. Two are separate. Body structure is separate and this light structure is separate. According to spiritual belief, the nucleus has our desires, hopes, decisions and passions, and these decide the next birth. This is the belief in that tradition. On death of a person, the light particles from the cells form a body that migrates out to space. So the entire light structure which you see in the body, they form a separate body, and at the time of death they leave our gross body and migrate. The subtle light body has all the memories stored during the lifetime. The self functions so long as the nucleus is present. When the nucleus is removed, the remaining part of the cell becomes non-functional. So the nucleus, which is in the form of light, if this part is removed, the body does not function at all. That is, body is dead. The above observations of Pandit Sri Ram Sharma Acharya, interpreted in terms of Jain philosophy, have very important significance. What these observations mean, in terms of Jain philosophy. The body of light that extends the cell, having desires, decisions, passions, memory, etc., and that it decides the next birth, can be compared with Karman body. In Jain philosophy, it is the carbon body which is doing that kind of function. So in fact, when he's talking, the Pandit Sharma is talking of this light structure, in fact he is referring to the carbon body. Carbon body exists independent of the gross body, as we know, as observed by Acharya. And when the carbon body leaves, the gross body does not function, This is what he observed. Further, the bright light spot in the nucleus could be due to coherent electromagnetic field created by carbon body. So when he observes a bright light spot like a star, this in fact could be due to coherent electromagnetic field, which I told you is created in our body. So these observations lend support or strong support to the belief that the carbon body present at the nucleus is the source of biophotons, So we are now pretty certain that the biophoton source is provided by Nam Karma. If the above hypothesis is accepted, we still call it a hypothesis because we do not have a direct proof, It's indirect observations on which all our hypothesis is based. But if we accept this hypothesis, it would herald a new era in science. The science now would be different, if you do accept this. Number one, what are the implications? Number one, study of soul now becomes part of science, because it is due to the soul that the carbon body is there, and it is because of the carbon body that the biophotons are being emitted, and therefore soul has to consider the presence of soul in order to explain the entire biological processes. The domain of body matter is extended to include matter subtler than photon. That is another part, Now the science has to accept that, besides the gross matter of, which is constituted by atoms, electrons and photons, there is a still subtler form of matter which exists in our body. And number three, the next point, the intelligent action supposed to be performed by DNA is actually because of the intelligence of the soul. The scientists are speculating that there is some intelligent force working in the body, and the Jain philosophy says this intelligent force is due to the soul. And this intelligence of soul is expressed through karma and transmitted through biophoton, So biophoton then is a carrier of intelligence from karma to gross body, and karma means, the source is the soul. It would also be a landmark in the history of Jainism, as it reveals how connection is made between the soul and the body. We have always been discussing and debating, how the connection is made between the soul and body, the non-physical soul and physical body. This point has been discussed over and over again, even in scriptures, how this connection is made. And here is a discovery which tells us that, look here, this is how the connection is made, The carbon body produces biophotons which work in the gross body, and the carbon body is associated with the soul. So there is a connection between soul and body. So this gives us a very important clue as to how the connections in the body are made. There is an external link of photon between carbon body and the gross body. So the entire phenomena is very interesting, from the scientific point of view and from the Jain philosophical point of view. So we now have a scientific understanding of the Jain principles. Okay, so we have a scientific basis. We have believed in these principles as a matter of faith, but now there is scientific basis to understand how the principles work in practice. And this has been possible because of the discovery of biophotons. This is only a beginning, and a lot more is to be done to understand how different karmas are working and controlling various biological structures and functions and processes. So we have to understand, how the karmas work in this gross body. This is only one aspect, the biophotons provide us one aspect, how nam karmas are working in the gross body. But there is a lot more to be done in the sense that, we do not know actually how different types of karma are working in the body, So there is a lot more scope to study the relationship between science and Jain philosophy. And this would enhance our understanding and establish Jain philosophy as a scientific principle. So this kind of study is very helpful, and it really supports Jain philosophy to its claim that it's a scientific philosophy, and the Jain principles are scientific principles. So we have discussed in this lecture an important discovery of biophotons. Thank you.